All right. Hey, everyone. And okay, hold on because there we go. It's like having a Facebook thing. So we are live on Facebook, live on YouTube. Hey, everyone. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Stacy Lauren, and I'm the founder of the Do the Thing community, and then also have the Do the Thing podcast. And I have an amazing guest on today because we have so many people in the community that have podcasts and that want to grow their podcast, improve their podcasts, all the things podcasting. So I brought on a podcasting expert, which I'm really excited to have you here, Joe. We met recently through a mastermind that I recently joined, and I just was immediately enamored with your humor and fun yet brilliant mind and the way that you see things and automations. And so he's the founder of Podcast Workflows and also has a podcast. But hey, welcome to Do the Thing.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the kind words. I like blush a lot when people say a lot of nice things about me all in a row, but thank you very much. I'm so excited that we got to meet. I'm really excited to do this today too.
Yeah, yeah. Please share with people like who you are, what you do, and then I'd love to, yeah, just get in because I know so many people are wanting to grow their podcasts, and I'm just telling people that we're live right now. So I am all here
Awesome. Yeah, I
podcasting.
it's like doing the live stream and also being like the live stream producer. It's like it's like so much work. I did a live stream where I was just the producer and not the presenter recently, and I'm like, this is nice. This is like
Oh yeah,
way less work.
speed better. Yeah, that's true. It's
um
true. Yeah. So yeah, tell everyone about you and yeah, what you love to do.
Yeah, so I am a podcaster of 10 years. I got my start in web development, so I've been a web developer of 20 years, and I'm a dad of three. And the way I got into this line of work, which is helping busy solopreneur podcasters who are probably parents save 12 hours per week producing their podcast.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, it's very specific.
Yeah.
Um, but it's I had a panic attack in 2020 because my wife's a nurse and we had kids at home, and so I wasn't working, and the stress of like the pandemic and being a dad to small children and not doing any of my work like got to me. And this was like a really crystallizing moment for me because my daughter, who was 3 at the time, came over and like brought me a bottle of water and said like, it's gonna be okay, daddy. And I was like, well, this is not something I ever want to happen again. And so basically like the next week, I started taking everything I possibly could off of my plate, like automating. I hired a VA.
Mhm.
And so I went from doing everything for my podcast except for editing. I knew pretty early on I didn't want to do that.
Mhm.
To basically only talking. And so like once
Mhm.
I send the files to my editor, I never see my
Mhm.
podcast again until it's live. So that was like a game changer for me, and I
Amazing.
thought, yeah, I'm like, I don't want people to have a panic attack to to realize they need this, so I'm going to help as many people as possible do this.
Yeah,
Sans panic attack.
amazing. It's so good when you're able to like, you come from that moment, right? Where you're just like everything's falling on you and crushing at you and then you figure out like the secret to like moving through it, right? And then now you're able to help people kind of work through that whole process, which is amazing. And I see Melissa's here. Hey, Melissa. So Melissa has a community, but she also has a brand new podcast that she's working on. I don't know if you've launched it yet. Let me know if it's been launched, but I'm thinking, oh, and Breda's here. Good to see you, Breda. And Breda, I just sent her the podcast workshop. So she'll be starting a podcast soon. So it's perfect timing. And so one of the things I'm going off like what you're going to show right now. So sorry for this little
No, no
curveball,
problem.
but because Joe's going to help us. He's got a whole thing where he's going to show us ways to grow your podcast, which I know you guys want to see. But this is something I'm thinking of Melissa specifically, who's already going live in her community, right? Just like this live will kind of like not be done well on the back end. It's always like unorganized in my head right now, where I'm like, okay, I went live. Okay, I want to get that on the podcast. Now I need to send it here and send it there. And so I imagine, and Melissa's already doing this in her group. She's got these amazing experts coming in. She has community coming in, going live. And so there's a workflow then that she could basically take the live from the group and then put it in the podcast, right?
Nice, nice. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, That's really interesting because a lot of people have asked me about that, right? I think like this happened like with, I don't know how many people remember Clubhouse because that's like 100
Oh,
internet years
yeah.
old. Um, but I think like a live or something like that is a little bit of a better format, right? Like a Clubhouse. My first podcast, which I launched in 2012, was basically just like me and a bunch of dudes talking about something we didn't know anything about, which is like the heavy vibes that Clubhouse had, right? Um, but like when you do a live and you're like an expert or you have an expert and you're presenting, I think that's really good. Like it's really good to repurpose that. You know, I'll do like live
Yeah.
coaching calls on my YouTube channel and then it'll make it into the podcast feed. Or like one of my favorite YouTubers is called Alt Shift X. He is like deep into Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon lore.
Mm,
And he does like a 3 hour live stream after each episode of House of the Dragon where he breaks down all the, like everything and
huh.
answers questions, and like those are also available in a like in podcast
Love
form,
that.
which is I think
Yeah.
which is so smart.
Yeah, and I'm seeing Sarah's here. Sarah has the Do It Now podcast. We helped start that one. And so you just had, I don't know if you were doing this, Sarah, but I want to get better at telling you guys because you just had Lucy on as an expert. So it'd be great if you then put that into your podcast. So that's why workflows are so important, which is one of the things Joe is an expert at. And then I just want to check more comments here. Sorry. But Brita said she's a wannabe podcaster. You are like a podcaster because you have the workshop now. So you'll be starting it soon. And then Melissa said, good to see you both. I haven't launched the podcast yet, but I want to get it done soon. And then Neil, good to see you, Neil. So good. So yeah, so this is why this is so important, because if we could take the things we're already doing and are great, like you said, right? Like all you have to do now is do an interview, and whether it's live or whether it's just on Zoom or recorded, or like we're looking at Ecamm, you're doing Ecamm now, I'm learning that. It doesn't really matter now, right? Like you just want to take it into the podcast and have a system for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, I think like how it ties into what we're talking about today is I think a lot of people want to focus on the growing their podcast by doing paid ads or like repurposing clips to social media, which I don't think work very well, at least anecdotally for me. Um,
It's a great word.
yeah, right. We just like invented a new word here. Uh, Anecdotally, it doesn't work for me, and it's because like I always equate like trying to get people on TikTok, say, to listen to your podcast is almost like someone goes for like a leisurely walk just to like stretch their legs, and then like you walk up and you're like, hey, I'm gonna run a marathon. You gotta run a marathon with me right now. And this person's like, I'm not, I just wanted to go for a walk. I'm not ready to run a marathon. Like I haven't been training for it. And it's like
Yeah.
when you like release a short form video on whatever, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok or whatever, um, those people are like ready for short form. They're not ready for the 30 to 60-minute conversation, right? And so
Mm.
um my point being is like people spend all this time doing these things when there are a few ways that you can better position your podcast for growth without spending a bunch of extra hours on it. So like
Mm.
if you improve your packaging a little bit and you attract the right people, then you can focus on telling the right story and creating the best content for your audience and growing your business and your authority through your podcast.
So good. I love that. Yeah, doing it in less time. So, and Paul's here, you guys. So, you guys, Paul, sorry not to interrupt you. Paul, Paul has a writing thing happening later. So, make sure you comment to Paul if you want to be involved with that. Okay. So, I am here with you, Joe. I'm super excited. I feel like so many people want to not only like interview people, right? But they want people to now, like, they want to get it out in the world even more. So I'd love to hear all your tips and tricks for doing that. Do you want me to add your slide to the stage? Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
You think? Okay, cool. We're ready for
Yeah,
that.
no, let's do it.
Look at that. Oh, look at that. It's
Yes.
exciting.
So I was telling Stacy a little bit before we went live that I did an audit last week. And as I'm doing the audit, I thought of like a couple of extra things to add to this that are super simple. Like this is gonna be really good. This is gonna be really good. I'm really excited. So Let's dive into it. I think a lot of people are we ready to dive into it. First of all, Stacy, are we
Oh
good?
yeah, are you
You're our
guys game?
DMC.
Let us know. Yeah, let us know if you're game.
Yeah, let us know. Yeah, let us know like the things that you've tried to do to grow your podcast. I'd love to hear
Oh
like what
yes,
everyone's trying. Yeah.
I love
Um,
that.
awesome. So this
Good.
is, I think, what a lot of people try to do, right? It's like they are posting on Twitter, like, "Hey, listen to my podcast. Hey, here's the latest episode." Um, posting short forms like saying like, "Hey, if you want to hear this whole conversation, go over here." This doesn't work, right? Um, the first thing that you need to do to grow your podcast is optimize for discovery, right? And I know that in this group specifically, right, Stacy's all about like launching messy, and that's great because you need to launch, right?
Mhm.
Um, what's the saying? Perfectionism is the enemy of uh whatever.
I know procrastinate. Wait, what does Eileen Wilder say? She says procrastination is the enemy of. Well, anyway,
Yeah. We're
just do
real
the
good
thing.
here.
Just do the
Do
thing.
the
Just
thing,
do
yeah.
the thing. How about
Um, and but then once you launch, right, you optimize, you iterate, right? This is something that I learned from my software engineering background, right? It's like when you build a building, it needs to be perfect on the first shot, right? You're not gonna get like another shot to build a building without it being like really expensive. Doing anything on the internet is like the opposite of that, right? Like you can
Mhm.
launch your podcast today and then like hate the artwork and change it tomorrow, right? And like it won't
Yeah.
even it like so launch and then optimize for discovery. So this is really what we're going to talk about today, right? Is 9 changes you to do to grow your podcast where you're optimizing for discovery.
Mm.
And so we're going to walk through this. This is like a 9-point framework essentially. At the end, I'm going to have like a free template that I do for my audits that you can download if you want to audit yourself. And, there's the opportunity for me to audit your show as well. So number 1 is be in every directory.
Mm.
I'm not sure if you're hearing this. I'm going to break two, like one is like Murphy's Law of live streaming is that when you live stream, someone's going to mow the lawn right outside your window. Hopefully you don't hear that because my
Yeah, we hear it. We don't hear that at all. So you're good. That's
great.
hilarious.
So
So
number 1 is be in every directory. This is a screenshot from the audit. These are the places I think you should be in, and I'll
oh
just walk through them
wow.
really quickly, right? Apple Podcasts, it's still like 70% of people, 60 to 70%, right? Yes, Spotify is eating Apple's lunch a little bit. Yes, YouTube is eating Apple's lunch a little bit. But Apple Podcasts is still the place to be because aside from just Apple Podcasts, this is also the place that smaller directories pull from. So like
Mhm.
Overcast or some other podcast or Podcast Addict, like these are places where they're going to reference Apple Podcasts. So like you definitely want to be there. Spotify, number 2, definitely want to be there. YouTube, newcomer to the podcast scene, quickly growing, best place for I think organic discovery, right?
Mhm.
The problem with like Apple Podcasts and Spotify is that there's no like algorithmic I said organic. I meant algorithmic discovery, right?
Mm.
Like Apple Podcasts is not using an algorithm to recommend episodes to you. Spotify doesn't do that very well. YouTube does it extremely well, right? Like
Mhm.
this has been their whole thing for the last decade or so. So definitely want to be there. Podcast Index, and then the rest of these are like kind of bespoke places where you definitely want to be because you want to capture as much audience as possible. You want to meet your people where they are, right? When I
Mhm.
was freelancing, I would tell my clients, "Hey, I know you hate PayPal, for example, but if your client wants to pay you with PayPal, you should let them, right? Like make it as easy as possible for people to do the thing that you want them to do."
Mhm.
And so being in every directory is a really simple thing for you to do that could gain you, especially if you look at like player.fm or Castbox, like these are where the biggest podcast fans live, right? The
Mm.
biggest like the podcast enthusiasts are probably not using Apple Podcasts.
Mm.
they're using some bespoke app that gives them this one feature that they love. And those people are going to be the most likely to share your show as well. So,
Wow, that's so interesting. I never knew that. That's really
yeah,
interesting.
it's like, like Apple Podcasts has come a long way, but like I love Overcast. Like absolute
Mm.
favorite app. I've tried leaving it and keep coming back because it's got really great features.
But like, what do you mean? What do you? And I don't want to get too off topic, but like,
Yeah.
what do you like? What do you mean by features? I don't even know. Like, are there extra features for different podcast platforms?
So the way that they organize things, right? So
Yeah.
like Overcast supports chapters, which Apple Podcast does
Oh,
too now.
okay.
Um but like for a long time they've supported chapters. For a long time they've supported custom episode artwork. Um
Hmm.
and so they're and like for Overcast specifically, they have a really great like playlist creation feature.
Oh,
So I can create there's a series called American Criminal. It's by Into History, maybe Wondery. It's a really interesting series, and they drop a bunch of episodes at once. And I will listen to the like that podcast on a long road trip.
hmm.
But I don't want like 10 episodes of a series like mucking up my whole podcast feed because I want to listen to the more recent ones or the more timely ones.
Hmm.
And so I have a separate playlist called Series, and that's just like all of the kind of serial podcasts I listen to.
Hmm.
So it kind of keeps things organized. Killer feature for me. And so like I love Overcast for that reason. There are some apps like Fountain and Podcast Guru that will allow like Bitcoin donations, which like we don't have to get into that.
Yeah.
As
Wow, it's
well
interesting.
as live streaming, right? So like if your podcast host supports the live stream tag, then you can live stream into those apps. And so like if you live stream a lot and you want your listeners to listen in a preferred app, then you got to make sure you're over in Fountain too, right? So like a
Yeah,
bunch of stuff like that.
that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Exciting. Hi, Vicky. Good to see you. She just finished with a client. She's excited. She made it.
Awesome. Yes. And now we're getting into the meat, right? Like we're
Okay.
getting into like the impactful stuff, right?
Yeah, so you
Inform
guys got like that to me already, like this is winning because like all these podcast directories, right? That's like so easy. You just set it up one time and then immediately it publishes to all of them once you have synced it once, which is
Yeah,
great.
that's exactly right. And like depending on who like where you upload your podcast, right? Like some of
Hmm.
these will automatic like Buzzsprout or RSS.com, like these will do it most of these automatically for you, like
Hmm.
submit to these directories. So like most of them it's as easy as pushing a button. Which, it's you're leaving money on the table a little bit if you're
Yeah,
not pushing all those buttons.
it's a really good point.
Awesome. So number 2, informative title and description, right? These are the questions that I ask when I'm looking at a podcast title. Does the title accurately describe what your show is about? Does it use terms your audience is looking for? And does it include a tagline to make it clear what problem you solve?
Mm.
So does it accurately describe what your show is about? First of all, I just rebranded my podcast. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if I had called my show the Joe Casabona Show, the only people who would care about it are like my mom and my wife. And that's like maybe, right? Because they know who Joe Casabona is. Um, so like you want to make sure that your name or your title speaks to your target audience. And this is I don't have this in today's presentation, but I am all about a podcast mission statement where
Mm.
it's like you say um who is my podcast for? What
Hmm.
problem do those people have? And how do I help them solve that problem?
Mm.
Right? So because if you're gonna launch a show about underwater basket weaving, right?
Hmm.
Then you want to make sure the title is not just like hanging out in the ocean, right? That doesn't
Yeah.
say anything. You want to call it like underwater basket weaving techniques, right? Like
Hmm.
um because that's what people are going to be looking for, right? And then
Totally.
just yeah. So and then like use the terms your audience is looking for. I think this is like a little bit of SEO esque stuff, right? If people are searching an Apple Podcast, you want to make sure they're using the like your keywords, right? Or you want your keywords to be the words they're using. I struggled with this when I rebranded my podcast to the Streamlined Solopreneur, because I was going to call it like the Automated Solopreneur, and I'm like, do people know what is automation to me the same as automation to my audience? And I
Mm.
found that like most search terms in the context of automation were like machine automation, right?
Mm.
Like on like actual like workshop floors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I went with streamlined because that's a more universal term that is understandable. And then I added a tagline, and the tagline is really important. This is, I would say, I'll show you an example of this, but it's like the actual name of your show colon and then like tips for underwater basket weavers, right? Like it's just like another opportunity to give more context about your show.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with your description, right? Does this read like a movie synopsis? We wanted to open a curiosity loop. Too many podcasts descriptions start with, in this podcast, the Joe Casabona Show, your host Joe Casabona interviews interesting entrepreneurs. That is so boring, and we just wasted like 10 words,
Yeah.
like the whole first line of a 2-line description that people are probably going to see,
Mm.
um, on meaningless words, right? So like we don't
Mm-hmm.
want to say in this podcast, not at least not until later on, like after people click more. We don't want to use the title of the podcast in the first 2 lines of the description. We want to open a curiosity loop.
Hmm.
Have you ever wondered how people can weave baskets underwater and not like suffocate? Like, oh, I have wondered that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm leaning into underwater basket weaving. It's like the thing that came to me.
I guess it's so
I
good. It's
usually do a
definitely,
bike shop, but I'm really tired of that. So
yeah. No, I'm liking the underwater
yeah.
basket weaving.
Um, so opening your description with a hook where people are
Yeah.
like, I want to know more. That's going to get more people to listen to your show. And so
Mm.
this is going to look modest, right? This is from April to June, 61,000 downloads about for my show last year.
Amazing.
After I made these changes, I got 8,000 more downloads, right? Just
Wow.
by making these 2 changes. This was basically just adding a tagline. And before I rebranded the Streamlined Solopreneur, it was called How I Built It. How I
Mm.
Built It. I launched it 3 months before How I Built This, and then
Wow.
refused to change the name.
Oh.
And the name like didn't even make sense anymore because I wasn't really like, it started off me interviewing developers. So like,
Yeah.
oh, how did you build that tool? I stopped interviewing developers in 2020. And so I didn't ask the title question. Like the title said nothing about the actual show or who the show is for anymore. But even so, like just adding the tagline, I think at the time it was called um, coaching calls for successful creators, right?
Okay.
People are like, oh, now I get it. I get what this show's about now.
Mm-hmm.
So that was title and description. I think those are going to be pretty big impact. Another thing that's really overlooked is the hosted by, right? So like you'll see in a podcast directory, we'll see an example of this in a second. It'll have the name of the show and then the host's name underneath. That doesn't just have to be your name.
Hmm.
You could have your title, or if you have, education credentials, right? I just did an audit for a speech coach who specializes in autism. And I said, you need to put your degrees at the end of your name for hosted by. So people immediately know, like, this isn't just someone who's talking about autism. This is a doctor
Mm-hmm.
talking about autism, right? And this is a really good place in a very limited amount of space to add more information, right? And make our podcast more information dense.
Mm-hmm.
So here is a bad example, right? Podcast workflows, Joe Casabona on podcast workflows, which now we see that 3, you can't see me pointing at my screen. That was stupid. On this screen, you see podcast workflows 3 times. You see Joe Casabona twice because I didn't put my name on the artwork either. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's right. On podcast workflows, host Joe Casabona teaches you the best ways to improve your podcast process to prevent pod fade and save time. Meh. That's like big meh energy. Here's a more information dense example.
Oh, wow.
Podcast workflows, tips for podcasters to grow their podcast
Whoa.
without wasting time.
Cool.
Now I know who it's for and
Yeah.
what I'll get. Joe Casabona, podcast systems coach. So this is a
Mhm.
guy who always teaches this. And then the description. Do you love having a podcast but hate the amount of time you spend on it?
Mm.
If someone answers yes to that, I've got them, right?
Yeah, I love that.
So like this is how you can optimize this small amount of space with a bunch of information. Optimize your title, your description,
Yeah.
and your hosted by name.
So good. And then, oh, sorry, just want to check the comments.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Nicole, good to see you. And then Vicky said maybe that's a secret gift that you have. And she was wondering if you go back and redo the title and description, or do you just start with new episodes?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think it depends on, let's say, like the long tail of your episodes, right? If you have like a news-based podcast, right? Like if you covered the first presidential debate last week, I don't think it's worth going. Like we've already moved on from that, right? Like the whole
Mm-hmm.
other thing happened that we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about now. So, but like if your episodes are less dependent on time, then I would. And actually, I made a huge mistake that I'm going to tell you about in my podcast, which was like include the episode. Not like my podcast titles were just episode number with guest name. And so I actually created a spreadsheet, updated all of the titles, and had my VA go through and update them
Oh,
all.
yeah.
And that worked wonders for me, right? Because it breathed new life into
Mm-hmm.
almost 400 well, at the time it was like 200 episodes. And it gave people a better idea of what that episode was about. So yeah, and I think like with your podcast, experiment. Like I recommend not using your face on artwork. We'll talk about artwork too. But like I tried it. There was a decrease in my downloads. And like, I mean, I don't think I'm that repulsive. It's just that people see a face, and if they don't know it, they're going to scroll by it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So it's like a little bit of the opposite of YouTube, right? Because like they recommend like have
Mm-hmm.
like your expressive face in your thumbnail. It's like,
Yeah.
but you have a lot more space on your thumbnail to also add other context.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I love the cleanness of it too.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I want to rework this a little bit. I think this was like a good first pass, but I think I could probably come up with something better, or really have my graphic designer come up with something better. So okay, number 4, check your category. I think this is really interesting. I don't think a lot of people consider this, but again, if we look at another podcast audit I did, they just had their podcast in the how-to category. And I feel like how-to and business and technology are all like catch-all categories where there's a lot of competition. So, are you in the right category? Have a look at all the possible categories and consider if there's a better fit, because this will help the apps surface your show to the right people. And so in the case of this how-to person, I recommend that they moved it into kids and family because it was a parent-oriented podcast. Like, yes, it was like how to be a better parent, but like kids and family is where people might be looking for that, right?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just Alan. Yes, you're here. He just asked if we're allowing non-podcasters here. Yes, and I was just you missed Alan. I was talking about this earlier. Any live that you do in your group, any expert you bring in, any guest you celebrate, you could put that into your podcast, so it's even easier. So yeah, so category. So how do you, I always wonder with this one, because I help people set up their categories, and honestly, I still don't really know like when to do it. Is that like, how do you even really know, especially like when it's borderline personal development and mental health, and then where that fits in?
I think it's tough, and I think it's kind like, okay, like YouTube categories don't matter at all, right? Like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what category you put it in because YouTube doesn't consider that one of the signals for your content. Conversely, like it's not that categories don't matter, because they do. This is how all the charts are constructed, right? And how all the directories are constructed. But Apple and Spotify aren't like checking to be like, hey, you say this is management, but not management the way we
I
know
see.
it or understand
Yeah.
it. So what I would do is I would maybe look at 5 categories that are either perfect or very close, and look
Mm-hmm.
at the other shows in those categories. I included a link here on this slide.
Oh, that's
Um,
so smart. Yeah.
yeah, right. Because
I love that.
our
Yeah.
goal here is to stand out, right?
Yeah.
And like, if you're gonna be in the business category because your show's about business, then just know you're competing with like Dave Ramsey and a bunch of other people who just like put, if you're doing politics, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
competing with a lot of big names, whereas maybe in business management or which is the
Mm-hmm.
subcategory like business marketing, maybe you're not competing with as many people there, right?
Yeah.
So I link to a resource here. It's a couple of years old, but I think it's instructive on like what the most competitive categories in Apple Podcasts are. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be over at go.podlift.me/category. Um,
Okay.
and I think like if you're struggling, maybe look and look at that
That's
chart
great.
and just see like, oh, all right, well, there's not a lot of competition here, and I'm like tangentially related, right? Um,
Yeah.
Streamline Solopreneur, and also you can change this every week if you want, right?
Yeah.
Like, um, I'm doing
I
like
love that you mentioned. I love that you mentioned that because I was just in my mind thinking because I know Breda's here and Alan who don't have podcasts yet, and I'm like talking to them about starting podcasts, and so in my mind I'm like, okay, don't listen to this part because these are the things that get you stuck. But it's perfect once you're at like 10 episodes, 15 episodes. Now let's dive into your categories, right, and be more like specific, which is. I think it's great that you were speaking to that because it doesn't matter. You can change, like you said, you can change the name, you can change the image, you could change the category. Like that's what's so great about podcasting.
yeah, and you should, right? Like these are all like, I mean, like people A/B testing thumbnails on YouTube
Mhm.
is such a thing that YouTube basically Sherlocked a $50 a month service, right? Like TubeBuddy and vidIQ are both like charging $50 a month for you to A/B test thumbnails, and YouTube is like, we'll take this. Like
Mhm.
this was worth our time to build it into the platform.
Yeah.
And you can't like A/B test artwork, but like you can change it and see month to month if things change. Like right now, Streamline Solopreneur is in the business management category because I'm seeing, all right, well, like this is not management like managers, but it's management like managing your business. Like, are people looking for that? Let's
Mm,
find out. Um, and then I'll probably change it in a few weeks and see if there's a better category for that. Because,
I
like,
love
right,
that.
yeah,
Yeah. It's so good. Oh, and Jackie's here. She also has a new podcast. I'd love you guys to put in the comments your podcast and who you want to interview. Also, use this time for collaborations. Also, so
yes, love
yeah,
that.
so
Uh,
good.
that's actually perfect because in a few slides, I'm going to talk about podcast swaps and how they could
Yes,
be huge.
great.
So, number 5, make your artwork stand out.
Oh, great.
Look at your show with the shows in the same category. This is why I like choosing a category. Choose a category that works best for you and then experiment with it. But then look at that category or search for your podcast and see the other shows that come up and see where your eye is drawn. If it's not drawn to your artwork, you have some work to do, right?
Mm,
The other thing is, can people determine what the show is about just by looking at the artwork, right? So, like, if we look at Streamline Solopreneur, right? You look at it, that's the name. So, like, I already kind of have an idea of what the show is about. Like, okay, I'm a solopreneur. But then like there's sand going up through an hourglass, right? Like I
mhm,
think that this is a pretty decent concept for like you're gonna get time back. Um, this was the artwork for one of my coaching clients or one of my audit clients, like pre-audit. Um, and there's a lot going on here, right? There's
mhm.
a lot of text, and I think like it should be minimal text because people aren't gonna read a bunch of text, right? Name of the show, he could probably eliminate this. Um, and like he can eliminate the wave file because like wave file, microphone, headphones, like we don't need that. we know it's a podcast, right? Book
That's true.
covers don't have a picture of a book on it.
Funny. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. It is so funny, right? Oh my gosh, that would be a fun game to count how many podcasts have the microphone.
It's a lot. Unlike, I mean, if you go to the business category, every business podcast has like the host smiling in front of a microphone. Like, and like if you're known, fine, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're a recognizable person, then yes, use your face. But if you're not, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Now Holly's here, right? Her face was a lot bigger on the original artwork. And I said, like, if you want to keep your face, fine. Like you've got a big like smiling face and like your shirt pops. But shrink it down, make the name of the podcast bigger, and then like hosted by Holly Arnett was up here. And I'm like, deprioritize that. Like I would take it off completely.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't want to, deprioritize it, right? Now my coaching client Annie, Up My Nursing Game. This is good. This is the name of the show. Picture of nurses, draws you in, really nice illustration. So I think like this is good, right? I mean, the only thing I might change is like there's a little bit of conflict here, but like this is good artwork because it's simple, it stands out, people know what the show is about. I think that's really important. So yeah, I kind of walked through all of these. Like minimal text, ideally only the name of the show. You don't need to put your name on it unless people know your name a lot. Unless your name is universally recognizable, I'll say.
So interesting.
Yeah. Because like when people are, I didn't start here, but 78% of people listen to podcasts to learn something new.
Right.
And if they don't already know who you are, then like your name is irrelevant to them, right? It's like, which is like maybe a harsh truth, but like if you work with a speaking coach, they will say the biggest mistake that speakers make is starting with, "Hi, my name is Joe. I'm a podcast systems coach. I've been doing this for 10 years." You should start with a story because that's what draws people in. And then when they care about you and understand you have something interesting to say, then they want to know about you. And so like if you put your face or your name on your podcast artwork and put it you forward first, unless people already know you, they're not going to click through.
Good point. So good.
We always want to answer the question, what's in it for me? Right? Like this is we want our potential listeners to get that, right?
Yeah.
So actually here's the case study, right? So like you could see, so we cropped in on Holly's face here, but like we got rid of, again, I'm pointing at my actual screen.
I messed you up because you're not using Ecamm, because don't you normally are able to like do all that stuff. Yeah.
I would I'm not gonna front. I did that when I taught in the classroom too. I would like point at the computer screen instead of the projected screen. I'm like but you know, there's like her desk, so we focused in a little bit more. The name of the podcast is bigger, and we deprioritized the name here. So I you know, I think that these were positive changes, and we'll see those positive changes later. I think I include another screenshot from her audit. Okay, so I know that I'm talking a lot here. We can run through a few of these. We've already talked about this one, right? Stop putting episode number in the episode title. That is again, that's irrelevant. The name of the game here is get people to listen in 4 lines or less, right?
Yeah. And oh my gosh, I'm like dying right now. I like want to look because I don't know in my mind. I'm like, I want to see like all my stuff now in my podcast. I have like this like weird obsession curdling up.
Yeah, I mean, like this is again, like I did this for 150 or so episodes because I thought it was relevant. But like, if someone wants to know, like why solopreneurs should time track, it doesn't matter that episode is episode 423, right?
Yeah.
And further, modern apps show that information somewhere else. So we want to optimize, right? And the same thing with in the episode description, don't write in this episode, right? We already know it's an episode. We don't need to start with that. We want to open a curiosity loops, right? So here's a couple of screenshots. One is from, again, this is kind of pre-audit. One is from Apple Podcasts. This is from Pocket Casts. You could see that Pocket Cast includes the season and episode number already. So now we're taking up his titles are pretty short, but you can imagine on a smaller screen navigating your fam. All right, I don't know what this episode's about now because episode dash 3 dash is taking up a bunch of like 10
Mm,
characters or whatever it is, right? Um, so and then this episode takes a little bit of a different direction, right?
mm,
We want to talk like this episode. I think is probably this is a guy who had a stroke and was diagnosed with MS all within like a month of each other. Um, and so like I would probably call this episode um what life looks like with MS at 39, right?
mm,
Um, and then like my hospital stay after I had my stroke was one of the worst nights of my life, right? That like
pulls you
I
in.
I want to know now.
Yeah.
So I think those are really important things to consider. If you have a guest, I wouldn't put the guest in the first name either because you probably put their name in the title.
Yeah.
I would
So
say, yeah,
question, because like I know like I love how you immediately go to the story. For someone that's not used to doing that, like what do you think is a good way to just kind of like pull that out easily?
yeah, great question. So a podcast mission statement will help with this, right? Because if you say, my audience is beginner underwater basket weavers
Uh-huh.
who don't know how to breathe underwater, and so my show is going to teach them how to like do it for a long time or whatever.
Mhm.
You know the goal of each episode, right?
Mhm.
And so you should also know the win, or at least the broad stroke win of each episode. And if you're having trouble pulling out a story, I would start with that, right?
Mhm.
Um,
I love that.
yeah. So like,
That's so smart. That's so good.
well, thank you. I think a lot about this, right? Because my show used to be me interviewing developers who are notoriously hard to get information from a lot of the time. And so
Mhm.
I would just ask the same 5 questions. And that worked for a while. But then as more people started doing interview podcasts and created interesting storytelling podcasts, that stopped working. And so I'm like, how do I make this a better experience for my listener? I want to tell them what they'll get from this episode.
Mm.
And so like it's like, hey, did you know that I was able to raise my hourly rate after I was time tracking? Like maybe that's the hook.
Yeah.
Because like, oh, I learned that I was spending 20 hours per project instead of the 10 hours per project, which means that I was able to increase my output and increase
Mm.
my hourly rate and take on fewer projects and still make the same amount of money. Well, oh, that sounds great. How do I time track, right? Like
Mhm.
that's ultimately what you want people reading these descriptions. Hey, this sounds good. I want to learn more, right?
Hmm.
Again, like a movie trailer or a movie synopsis, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
and
good.
anxiety is a new emotion and Inside Out too. Like when did Riley get that? Do we all still have that?
Yeah.
Excellent movie, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. No, so good. Especially I'm sure with your kids, they're probably
Oh my
gonna
gosh. Yeah,
really
we took my daughter for Big Kid movie night.
so good.
It was
And then,
good.
Anne Marie's here from About This Life. Hey, Anne Marie, good to see you. She was just saying storytelling is really important. And she starts with a quote, a story, a poem, or an excerpt from a book.
Yeah, love that. I love that, right?
Yeah.
And so like similar, right? If you look at these episodes, I remember the first time after my wife and I started dating that a mutual friend of ours became pregnant. What does that have to do with time tracking? Like, oh, now I want to know, right? Hopefully that's what people. And this episode did pretty well, so I assume this worked. Um, right, your next 1,000 leads with Jenny Wright. Just this morning, I watched an incredibly interesting video that sent me down a rabbit hole. Um, this is like, why is this is I like to do like this subverts expectations a little bit.
Mm,
Why is he talking about an arm wrestler? What does that have to do with leads? I want to know, right?
hmm.
Um, and so these are the kind of descriptions. Like, notice like episode number is nowhere to be found here, um, because that's not something that most people will care about. And I guess I should say the other thing with episode number here is that used to be important because podcast apps only organized episodes a certain way, right? But
Hmm.
today you can sort podcasts the way you want. and they'll automatically, if they're episodic, which means the order doesn't matter, they'll be sorted newest to oldest. But if they're serial, they'll be sorted, which is order matters, start at the beginning. They'll be
Mhm.
sorted oldest to newest, right? So then like you can trust they're sorted in the order in which you should listen. That's
Mm.
another reason where like episode number doesn't matter that much. Certainly not enough to include in the title. Maybe if you want to include it in the description, like if you feel that's really important,
Mhm.
you know, after the first 3 or 4 lines, I would say.
Yep. And then let's see. Brutus said, is this oh good. She's asking. I love that. You guys are collaborating. Oh, that's so good. And then Marie said essentially you're saying build curiosity. Yes, I love
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah,
You
I love
want
the word curiosity loop too. I think that's a great word.
oh, that's
Yeah.
great, right? I always think of The Great Gatsby, right? Where the female lead in The Great Gatsby, she was always described as she would talk low enough to make you lean in to hear what she's saying.
Mm,
And that's almost like how you want your description to be. Like you want people to
mhm.
read it and to like lean in a little bit and be like, all right, I'll listen to the first few minutes to see if this is actually going to be interesting.
Yeah, so good.
Number 7, have a clear call to action, right?
Yeah.
This is everything up until this point was packaging, right?
Mhm.
Let's say we got them to listen. Now we want them to stay. So I think join your mailing list is the best call to action because then you're bringing them onto your turf, right?
Yeah.
Um, there are a bunch of different ones and you should pick what's best for you. But I think join your mailing list is the best one because if you do have multiple asks, you can
Yeah.
ask them in a mailing list.
Oh, can I add one for your thing and you can
Yeah.
Okay, so my way is I love the mailing list, but since I help people with Facebook groups, I just have a call to action as my like link. So it's dothethingcommunity.com and then they join my Facebook group. That's how I've been getting most of my new people lately is just from saying it on my podcast at the end and then they join the Facebook group and you're getting their email list. So it's like double
Yeah.
whammy.
That's
Yeah.
perfect, right? The goal here is like you want them to take one action, right?
Yeah, one action.
A
That's so
good
important because a confused mind doesn't do. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I love that. A
That's my
confused
new
mind doesn't
thing.
do.
It's
Oh my
my
god, I
new
love that.
thing.
Yeah, that's great, right? It's like
Because a confused mind doesn't buy, but a confused mind also does not do.
right. And like this is I learned this lesson because like I when my oldest was 5, I was like, "All right, Therese, I need you to clean the sunroom, then brush your teeth, then put your pajamas on, then go to bed." And she's like halfway through walking into the sunroom to clean it before she's like, "What did you want me to do?" And I'm like, "All
Yeah.
right, one
It's
thing."
true,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, no, it's so true. And I'm that way, especially. Yeah, 3 sets of directions, it's really hard for me.
Yeah.
I need it like really simple in order to, hence why I'm a dare person, because it's like one simple action and I can do it. So yeah, call to action. I love that. I've done that before. That was actually my first time ever pitching something. Actually, a lot of you guys were there at the start of podcast challenge. At the end of it, that's when I decided to do the thing into a business. And I like pitched like 4 different things. I'm like, oh, and you can come to my 1-day intensive. Oh, and join this thing. I don't remember. It was all these different things. And I didn't know what I was doing, but it was like really funny. And
Yes.
you know what happens at that point? Nobody wants to do anything because
Right.
it's like, they're
Yeah,
like,
you
what am
give
I
them
supposed
too many
to do?
options. And like I get
Yeah.
it, right? Cuz like you want them
Yeah.
to do all these things. But we also need to remember like when I was in web development and like mobile website design started really becoming a thing.
Mhm.
Luke Roblewski was a guy who gave a talk and he said we have one thumb and one eye. Like we need to design
Mm.
our websites like we have one thumb and one eye.
Oh,
And
okay.
when you're creating your podcast content, we have one ear, right? We have like one ear and half a brain cuz most people are doing something else when they listen to podcasts. They're doing the dishes
Right.
or they're at the gym or they're going for a walk or if they're adventurous like some people they're trying to cook dinner while their 3 children are running around and listen to a podcast.
Yeah. True.
Let me
Yeah.
tell you the retention rate on those episodes. It's very poor.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you what I listen to. Um, and
Yeah.
so you want good a good call to action is singular, clear, easy to complete. And what I didn't write here is repeated. Say it multiple times. Say it at the
Mm.
beginning, say it in the middle when it's relevant, and say it at the
Love
end.
that. Yeah, I gotta
Um,
start doing that.
Yeah, I
And then,
think
oh, Vicky, you're helping Vicky. I'm so excited. She said she usually gives a list of all the different places that they can connect with me. Is that a good thing, or just do a call to action? So that would just be a call to action, right?
yeah, and I think like start with the place where you want to connect them the most, or want them to connect the most. Or I'll say, like, sometimes I'll say check out the show notes, right? I'll say, hey, if you're interested in connecting, look at the description in your podcast player, or go to
I see.
streamline.fm/425, right? Like,
Yeah.
um
And oh, speaking of show notes, Anne Marie asked, "What are the show notes?"
that is the description that shows up in the podcast player or on YouTube. Show notes is like such an old timey term now. But
It's
it's
under the
like,
there's like a title and then there's the description, right? So are
yeah,
those the description?
and the description is the show notes.
Show
Show
notes.
notes is like
Okay.
I'm gonna say antiquated term
Okay.
for because a lot of podcasts before 2014 when Lore came out were like white guys talking about Apple. And so like they would talk about like, oh, on 9 to 5 Mac they said this, and oh, on The Verge they said this, and you can find all of these links in the show notes. That's
Mhm.
basically, it's like footnotes, quote unquote, right? So
Mhm.
but yeah, show notes is the description, right? So like all of this will be in the description. Um and then in the description, make sure to include a link to your mailing list, your
Mhm.
socials, because if people are there, then they're going to click the thing that's interesting to them, right? So
Mhm.
that's also important. Optimize your show notes a little bit. Um, but it could also be like, hey, write in and ask questions at email. I like a feedback link. Like I own
Mhm.
streamlinedfeedback.com because that's just
Mhm.
easier to remember. Or share with a friend. Like any one of these is fine. Too many. This is like every outro to a podcast, right? Be sure to rate and review us on iTunes, which don't say iTunes anymore. It hasn't been iTunes for years. It's Apple Podcasts now. Um, but like, okay, this is like you're excluding 70% of podcast listeners. Rate
Yeah.
and review us in Apple Podcasts. Okay, well now 70% of people listening can't take action.
You know what I think is so important for people to know, and what I've noticed now doing this is like you're right, like once they find you one place, like it's so fun when you see someone absorbing your content because all of a sudden you'll see them, they join for me, it's like the Facebook group. That's my first thing, right? And then all of a sudden I'll see them subscribe on my YouTube. Then they fill out an old job form. Like, so they're interacting with your stuff, right? And so that's the thing, right? You want to the where you're most alive is where you want to bring them, because once they come to where you're most alive, then they're going to like already like self-select all the other stuff, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely true, especially when your podcast and your business or your podcast and your mailing list are aligned.
Yeah.
Um, so that's really important, right? But like, you know, or like review us in whatever podcast player you use and link in the show notes and find us on Twitter and Instagram and whatever. Like that's too many things, and people won't take action at that point. Like they'll forget. You're probably going to say the most important thing you want them to do first, and they've forgotten after you said the fifth thing.
Yeah. Okay. You have some questions. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. One is Brita said, what did you say about artwork? You only have one eye and one. I think we were
Oh,
just referring. Oh, go ahead,
yeah,
Galaxy.
I said one eye and half a brain. Like the point being, like people aren't fully focused on what you're doing or what they're doing in a podcast app, and
Yeah.
so like they're gonna be. Now this is different with artwork, right? If people are looking for shows, right, you want to catch their eye, and so I personally think like one bold color, the name of the show, in
Okay.
contrast, and then like a single image that drives home the point of your show is probably the best thing there, because
Mm,
you want them to click through to the title and description, right? Like when you see a book on a shelf, the cover attracts you and then you turn it around and you read what the book is about, right?
mhm.
So it's kind of the same thing, right? You're looking at a wall of squares. Which square stands out the most to me?
Mhm. Yeah, that's so good. Good. Thank you. And then, oh, Vicky's question was answered, so you're good there. And then, Anne-Marie said, does the picture of a guest help?
So this is a really good question. Now I have a picture of my guest in the episode artwork, and this is something else that I haven't talked about, but most apps support uh, episode artwork now. And so
Mm,
I do have a picture of the guest in the title. This is suboptimal, right? This is one of the things where I'm like, I launched because I needed to launch, and I will probably spend some time fixing this to
Mhm.
be a little bit different and stand out a little bit more. Like I probably don't need the name of the show once they're in this
Mm.
view. I probably want to have a couple of words letting people know what it's about, and then like maybe make the guest a little bigger, right? Because the guest, if people know who the guest is, then they're likely to click through there. And um, so it's like this is something I'm actively experimenting with. But I don't think that's her like including your guest's picture is better than putting your picture on your artwork, right? I
Yeah.
think yeah.
I think what you're speaking to, I love because like this is what you're spending your time on, right? Like we're spending time on all this other, like our own businesses, right? But you're an expert in this space. So you're testing, you're experimenting, you're figuring out what works. And then here you come, you get to tell us your answers. I just want to point out like how important it is when you guys are like wanting to do something is you find someone that like is like this is what their thing is, you know, because now you don't have to spend all this time iterating, testing and all that. You're able to like listen to Joe and be like, okay, I'm going to follow through. And granted, you'll have your own deviations as you go, but anyway, you're just making me see like why, like it's like who doesn't want a shortcut?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Right. And this is like something I love and I think about all the time. And I listen to so many podcasts and I see what others are doing. And then I try and I share a lot of this on my mailing list. Like usually,
Mm,
there are people who have like evergreen mailing lists that like they just set up like 40 emails and then it go like my
yeah.
emails are always written like the day before I send
Yeah.
them because it's
Just
like
saying,
whatever I'm thinking about. Like
yeah.
it's like, yeah.
I know I'm trying to automate that stuff, but I'm like, I don't know, because it has to come from the energy of where people are right now. So that's why, like, even when I'm launching something, I'm like writing the email like right that day, you know? So
Yeah. And like I
yeah.
mean, my live stream schedule, like if you look in Notion, it's scheduled through September or October, but I'm gonna change it based on like a listener or a reader question
Yeah.
that I get, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
that's
what the
good.
live streams are for,
I
right?
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
All right. So number 8 here. I don't know what time we are supposed to go to. I can go a little longer.
Yeah,
Uh
Vicky, are you okay? I'm meeting with Vicky after, as long as you're okay.
okay, cool. I'll
Yeah,
run through this
keep
really
going
quick
and we'll
cuz
see.
you're already doing this, but podcast swaps. My favorite story to tell here is Friends season 1. I'm an elder millennial. I love Friends. And the green line here is the most viewers they had up until the red line, right? And
Uh,
this episode was the one with Chandler's mom. Chandler's mom was played by Morgan Fairchild. So
mm,
celebrity power got this higher.
whoa.
This red line where we see sustained growth, this
Mhm.
was you could see 2 episodes here. This is the one with 2 parts is what this is called. In part 1, they had Helen Hunt and another person from Mad About You on the show.
Mhm.
In the second one, Rachel hurts her ankle and they end up going to a hospital. And the doctors are George Clooney and Noah Weil from a little show called ER. And
Mm,
so what they did was it was a crossover event, NBC's lead into Friends, and then the show that Friends led into. And they had guests from both of those shows because they were
mm,
lookalike audiences, and people stuck
mm.
around for Friends after
Look-alike
this.
audiences. Yeah,
Yes.
so good.
So there are 4 types of podcast swaps. There's promo swaps where you just do like your trailer on my feed, my trailer on your feed. Feed drops where you'll put a full episode of someone's podcast in your feed and they'll do the same for you.
Mhm,
Interview exchange where you and another person interview each other for your shows, or crossover episodes. This is very similar to what Stacey and I are doing right now because I'm streaming to
mhm,
my YouTube channel as well. We're creating one piece of content that's going on both properties.
mhm.
So those are the 4 types of swaps, and this is really important. It's all about borrowing lookalike audiences
Wow, that's good.
because, like, if you like, my friend has a podcast that has nothing to do with what I do, and like I can promote them for the love of the game, but they're probably not going to get a lot of listeners from my audience. The
Mhm,
thing that worked with Friends was Helen Hunt or Mad About You 20 somethings trying to make it in New York City while balancing work life and personal life. Friends, 20 somethings trying to make it in New York City while trying to balance love life and work life. ER, 20 somethings in a high stress job in Chicago, but they're still trying to balance that with their love life. very similar audiences here.
Mm.
And so that's why that worked. Look for podcasts that solve the same problem, serve a similar audience, have a host like you, like as far as what you do and where you are in life,
Mm-hmm.
that shows your listeners also listen to. So hey, be like, hey, what other podcasts do you listen to? Right? And reach out to
Mm-hmm.
those people. And then products you use, like, and then shows where products that you use sponsor those shows, because you're all
Mm.
trying to reach the same audience.
Mm-hmm.
And then these are 3 resources. This will be in the freebie, like places where you can find people to do swaps with. Of course, this Facebook group is also a place where you can do swaps with people.
Mm.
And then this is, I will share this, but this is the email that I send when I do a podcast swap, right? I mention where I found you, what I'm
Mm-hmm.
suggesting, why I think we would be a good swap, and then I would suggest, if I'm doing an interview, I would suggest topics as well.
Mm.
And then effective sharing. I'll run through this really quick, right?
It's actually you could if you because this is the hardest part, I think, and it's probably the most important, right?
I think the packaging is the most important, but this is the
Mhm.
one that you're going to do the most, right?
Yeah,
Because like once you set those things, you can let them run for a little while.
yeah,
Just saying, hey, listen to my podcast doesn't work.
right.
Because again, that's like, hey, you're going for a walk, now run a marathon with me,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to recommend Smart Passive Income 654, which
Okay.
episode number is here. This is only on the website. If you look in the actual,
Mm.
if you look at Apple Podcasts, I don't think you see this. How to use the sneak attack method for podcast growth, which with Jillian Tights. I
Okay.
think that's right. This was really good. It's a short
Mm.
episode. She does a really good job here.
Sure.
So I would strongly recommend that episode. But here's what you do instead. Don't just tease, tell, right? You want to create complete packages of value for the platform. So
Mhm.
don't just say, hey, listen to episode 425 where I talk about time tracking, right? Instead, I've changed the episode number. I said 423 earlier. For anybody who's like really paying attention to what I'm saying.
True. What is it
Instead,
called? Truth. Truth.
yeah, a little
What
truth
is,
bomb, right?
yeah.
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 Instead, say, hey, by time tracking, I learned that I could double my hourly rate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then say, like, the way I time track is I use an app called Timery that sits on top of a service called Toggle. If you want to learn more about this, there's a link in the description. But like, give them something that they could take away immediately. Present the value up front, and then ask a question and engage, right? Because some people just want to stay on LinkedIn, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's fine, because if they start following you on LinkedIn or on Facebook or Twitter, then, like Stacy said, they'll start looking in other areas for what else you're doing.
Yeah.
All right. But like, do all of this, then hit them with a call to action.
Yeah.
Give them value first. What's in it for me? What do they get?
Mm-hmm.
Then ask them for something. So I think that's the effective way to do this. Could be text posts. It could be short form video. Audiograms don't work. Like, I mean, like there's like research showed that they're like 60, they increase conversion 60%, but that was put out by a company that makes audiograms. So like,
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah. Definitely not.
Yeah, I don't think they work very well.
Legit. Yeah.
There are some good tools that do work. One is Capshow, right?
Mm-hmm.
From our friend Deidre Shen. They just released like a new generation of it. I tried it and I was blown away. And I am AI skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
So like I was impressed. And then Cast Magic, I use that one because I got an AppSumo lifetime deal. It's like one of the few that I actually use. But again, like that one is really good at like surfacing the interesting bits and the timestamps so that then you can do something with them. And I've had some success this way. I would say all of the other tips I talked about are the priority, because like if you do podcast swaps, those people are already listening to podcasts. Those are
Right.
people who are running a half marathon, and now you're just being like, hey, run a little further, and you've got, you're training for a marathon now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you present the value up front on social and you get people following you there, I would say don't expect people to like listen to your podcast from a tweet. right? But get them on your mailing list from a tweet and then promote your latest episode to your mailing list.
Yeah.
I think, God, I called this something in another webinar and I really wish I could remember what it was. But you want like incremental actions, right?
Yeah, I used to have no, just so you guys know, because I know there's a lot of new podcasters here. When I started, I had no rhythm to anything. Now I am kind of on a rhythm where it's like twice a week I publish podcast episodes. But would you, because I right now am not emailing, so I don't like burning out my email list, would you be, what's your email game for that? Like when do you email out your episodes?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I used to email the Streamline Solopreneur every Monday,
Uh-huh.
but my mailing list is podcasters who want to learn how to podcast better. And the
Mm,
Streamline Solopreneur is not that,
mm-hmm.
right? Like the Streamline Solopreneur is almost like, you know how people say those who can't do teach?
Yeah.
Like Streamline Solopreneur is me doing so that I can teach to my
Yeah.
mailing list.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, interesting.
but my other show, Podcast Workflows,
Yeah.
that content usually comes from long form writing that I do for my newsletter. So I will write a
Mhm.
newsletter that becomes a blog post, and then
Oh,
I
I
will
love
read that
that.
blog post as an episode.
Yeah, that's so smart. I love
So
that.
thank
Yeah.
you. I have a whole other talk on like my podcast content flywheel.
Okay, well, now we
Um,
have to have you come back in.
um, but what I'll usually do in my newsletter is it'll be
Yeah.
the longer form, it'll be the value, and then at the bottom I'll say like, hey, since you're still here, you might be interested in this episode of the podcast workflows, right? Where it's
Okay.
like it might not be the most recent one, but it's the most relevant one to what I talked about in the newsletter.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like I'm definitely gonna do, because like I saw some comments in another Facebook group recently that's like, hey, should we do episode number in the title? And I'm like, cool, I thought this was settled science. It's not. So I'm probably gonna do another newsletter about that soon. And then we'll be like, by the way, in episode 12 of Podcast Workflows, I tell you like other things that you shouldn't do that most people do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Well, please share with them how they can, learn about you and also the gift that you're giving them. It's exciting.
Yes. So here's a quick recap of everything I said. Be everywhere, optimize your title and description, update your hosted by name, check your category, improve your artwork, optimize episode titles and descriptions, clear call to action, podcast swaps, and share effectively.
Oh, and
These,
for those of you that were late and you didn't see it, the Be Everywhere is great. It's not like Be Everywhere, like Instagram posting all this stuff. He's talking about one time syncing to all the platforms. And then when you hit publish, it goes everywhere. So I love that.
yeah, make sure you are wherever people can listen to
Yeah.
podcasts.
So good.
So
Yeah.
these are the 9 steps that I run through in my podcast audit, which I do. But if you're interested in doing this yourself, I'm giving you. This is like very the first time I'm really offering it. It's my Notion template for doing a self audit. So I think I didn't share. I'll share the other screen here. My Notion screen, so you can actually see this and I can tell you about it. Window. There we go. Great.
Oh, let me add it.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So this will walk you through everything I talked about here. I'm going to ask you to come up with a mission statement. And then you can see if you're in all of these directories. Most of them have links for you to check. And then all the questions that I ask during an audit with examples. And then some other resources that I include here. And if you go through this and you still want my help, there is a kind of discounted coaching call. Since you did all the work up here, right?
Yeah.
We can walk through it separately. So
Amazing. I love
yeah.
that. Thank you so much. That's so cool.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. I could do that all day.
And Melissa said, thank you so much, Stacey and Joe. I will be starting my podcast soon, and I'm excited to take all your help and advice.
Excellent.
Yay. Very cool. Well, appreciate you. You guys grab this self audit. That's amazing. I'll try to put the link in the comments later on. And yeah, I really appreciate this a lot.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks everybody so much for coming. Now I'm gonna muddy the water by giving multiple calls to action. But I am at Jay Casabona on most social networks.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. So
Cool.
actually, I'll change this on the fly.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
and you're speaking soon, aren't you? Aren't you going to be speaking at the that
oh,
podcaster
yeah,
event? Well, we'll give it. Now we'll really
Podcasting Made
confuse
Simple
them.
live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, coming up in a couple weeks, and that will be very automation focused.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
so that's like if you are a seasoned podcaster and you take the next 2 weeks to do all of this stuff, and then you're like, hey, how can I save like 12 hours a week? The things I talk about at Podcasting Made Simple will help you there.
That's so good. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. And thanks you guys for joining. It's so fun to see you, and do the thing. Don't wait for opportunity. Create it. Bye.